Good evening, I'm Gwen Eiffel. On the NewsHour tonight, the news of this Monday, then the Wall Street meltdown. What happened, why, and what's next? A campaign snapshot from Amy Walter and Susan Page. And a report from Texas on the wrath of Hurricane Ike.
Major funding for the NewsHour with Jim Lehrer is provided by...
The world is changing, and how we use energy today cannot be how we use it tomorrow. There is no one solution. It's not simply more oil, more renewables, or being more efficient. It's all of it. Our way of life depends on developing all forms of energy and to use less of it. It's time to put our differences aside. Will you be part of the solution? Chevron, human energy.
Pacific Life. Vestas.
The William and Flora Hewlett Foundation, working to solve social and environmental problems at home and around the world.
And with the ongoing support of these institutions and foundations. And
this program was made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
This was a day of reckoning for giants in the U.S. financial industry. The fallout was felt from Wall Street to the campaign trail and beyond. The first blow came at Lehman Brothers. The investment bank filed for federal bankruptcy protection after 158 years in business. Then Merrill Lynch, the world's largest stockbroker, agreed to be bought by Bank of America for $50 billion. And the world's largest insurance company, AIG, searched for ways to raise up to $40 billion in cash. In Washington, President Bush said the administration is working to minimize disruptions in the U.S. economy.
As policymakers, we're focused on the health of the financial system as a whole. In the short run, adjustments in the financial markets can be painful, both for the people concerned about their investments and for the employees of the affected firms. In the long run, I'm confident that our capital markets are flexible and resilient and can deal with these adjustments.
Lehman Brothers alone has 25,000 employees worldwide. It was unclear just how many might lose their jobs. The news about Lehman Brothers and Merrill Lynch hit Wall Street hard. The Dow Jones Industrial Average lost 504 points to close at 10,917, its worst day since right after 9/11. The Nasdaq fell 81 points to close below 2180. We'll have more on all of this right after the news summary. The economic turmoil dominated the presidential campaign today. In Jacksonville, Florida, Republican John McCain said again the fundamentals of the U.S. economy are sound, but he promised to clean up Wall Street. Running mate Sarah Palin campaigned in Golden, Colorado. She echoed McCain's call for a total revamp of financial controls.
Guys and gals, our regulatory system is outdated and it needs a complete overhaul. Washington has ignored this. Washington has been asleep at the switch and ineffective, and management on Wall Street has not run these institutions responsibly and has put companies and markets at risk.
On the Democratic side, Barack Obama was also in Colorado. He charged Republican economics led to the financial mess, and he said McCain supported those policies. Obama's running mate, Joe Biden, campaigned in St. Clair Shores, Michigan. He said McCain doesn't get what Americans are going through.
He says that we've made great progress economically in the Bush years. Ladies and gentlemen, I could walk from here to Lansing, and I wouldn't run into a single person who thought our economy was doing well, unless I ran into John McCain.
We'll have more on the campaign later in the program tonight. The death and damage from Hurricane Ike stretched from Texas to Canada today. The death toll reached 34 across 9 states. In Texas, more than 2 million people in Houston and elsewhere had no power, and many faced weeks ahead without it. Along the coast, Galveston was strewn with debris. Some beachfront homes were simply washed away, and the mayor warned people not to come back yet.
We've been encouraging people to leave before the storm. And sometimes the aftermath of a storm is worse than the storm itself. We are in an emergency response mode. There's nothing to come here for right now. Please leave. I'm asking people to leave here.
The remnants of Ike moved northeast over the weekend, leaving a trail of flooding from Missouri to Illinois to Ohio. The wind and rain also knocked out power to more than 2 million people across the Midwest. We'll have more on the aftermath of the storm later in the program tonight. The price of oil finished below $100 a barrel today for the first time in 6 months. That was driven by the day's economic news and by indications that energy sites in Texas came through the hurricane better than expected. In New York trading, oil fell nearly $5.50 to finish below $96 a barrel. It hasn't been that low in 6 months. On the other hand, gasoline spiked over the weekend with so many Gulf Coast refineries shut down. It topped $4 a gallon in parts of the South. The president of Zimbabwe, Robert Mugabe, signed a deal today to share power with opposition leader Morgan Tsvangirai. The agreement, signed in Harare, made Tsvangirai the country's prime minister. He was also given some control over security forces.
The hand with which I signed this agreement is the hand I extend to President Mugabe for the well-being of our nation in my pledge to work with all leaders of Zimbabwe to bring our nation back to life. Let us not be divided by our past, but united by hope for the future.
Mugabe has accused Western powers of backing the opposition, but he said he's committed to the deal signed today, and he said Zimbabwe's neighbors helped make it happen without any Western involvement.
I don't see any British amongst them. There is no American amongst them. They are Africans because Zimbabwe is African.
The deal followed weeks of tense negotiations after a widely disputed election. Government forces in Pakistan killed 24 suspected militants along the Afghan border today. It was the latest in a 6-week offensive in the region. In Iraq, a woman blew herself up in a crowd of police officers in Diyala province, killing at least 22 people. And in Baghdad, 2 cars exploded in succession, killing at least 13 people. Nearly 40 others were wounded. Another person died today as a result of last Friday's fatal Los Angeles train crash. In all, 26 people were killed when a commuter train ran through stop signals. It collided head-on with a freight train. Federal safety investigators said today they want to know if the engineer was text messaging on his cell phone right before the crash. He was among those killed. That's it for the news summary tonight. Now, the upheaval on Wall Street, the presidential campaign, and after the storm in Texas. Now, an in-depth look at the crisis on Wall Street and the fallout, beginning with a report on what transpired today and this past weekend, one of the most tumultuous in Wall Street history.
I hope you all had an enjoyable weekend.
This morning's rude awakening, news of the disintegration of 2 Wall Street investment houses, sent Treasury Secretary Henry Paulson to the White House to try to calm the waters.
Well, as you know, we're working through a difficult period in our financial markets right now as we work off some of the past excesses. But the American people can remain confident in the soundness and the resilience of our financial system.
But the market skidded all day after Paulson and Federal Reserve Chief Ben Bernanke spent the weekend in New York but would not commit to government aid. As a result, Merrill Lynch was sold. 158-year-old Lehman Brothers, carrying $613 billion in debt, declared bankruptcy.
Nothing is more important right now than than our stability of our capital markets. And so I think it's important that regulators remain very vigilant. We're very vigilant, but we do not take, and I don't take lightly, ever putting the taxpayer on the line to support an institution.
Should we read that as no more?
Don't read it as no more. Read it as that, you know, it's important, I think, for us to maintain the stability and orderliness of our financial system.
Lehman gave way as a result of billions of dollars in bad bets on the subprime mortgage market. Paulson declined to use taxpayer dollars to help. Merrill Lynch was saved only by a late-night agreement to merge with Bank of America. The $50 billion all-stock transaction reassured shareholders and the millions of Americans who use its huge network of stockbrokers. Bank of America CEO Ken Lewis and Merrill chief John Thain said the deal came together quickly.
John called me on Saturday morning, and we began to talk about this opportunity over the phone. And then a few hours later, we were talking about it in person. And then basically went from there.
This is the second time Bank of America has come to the rescue of another failing institution caught in the grip of the mortgage credit crisis. Earlier this year, it purchased lender Countrywide Financial for pennies on the dollar. Merrill CEO Thain was asked what he would say to a nervous public.
This is probably the most difficult environment in the financial markets that I've experienced in my 30 years in the business. But it is a cycle, and we will get through it. It will get better. And when it gets better, I think this combination will be incredibly strong and do very, very well. But it is definitely a very, very difficult time, and it's not going to get better quickly.
With the government-backed sale of Bear Stearns in March, 3 principal independent investment banks are now going or gone. Contributing to the uncertainty this weekend was the financial health of insurer American International Group, which is now seeking $40 billion in federal assistance to shore up its faltering balance sheet. Late today, the Wall Street Journal reported that the federal government had asked 2 other firms, Goldman Sachs and J.P. Morgan, to help raise the money. And last week, the government agreed to take over the congressionally chartered lenders Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. Together, they hold about half of the outstanding mortgages in the United States. The underlying concern that the slide in the housing credit market has not yet hit bottom.
The root of the problem lies in this housing correction. And until we stem the housing correction, until the biggest part of that is behind us and we have more stability in housing prices, we're going to continue to have turmoil in the financial markets. And that is why the actions with respect to Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae are so extraordinarily important, not only to our capital markets, but to making sure we have plenty of finance in housing, because that, in my judgment, is going to be the key to turning the corner here.
Over the weekend, former Federal Reserve Chief Alan Greenspan also offered a dour assessment.
That this is a once-in-a-half-century, probably once-in-a-century type of event.
Is it the worst you've ever seen in your career?
Oh, by far. There's no question that this is in the process of outstripping anything I've seen, and it still is not resolved, and it still has a way to go. And indeed, it will continue to be a corrosive force until the price of homes in the United States stabilizes.
Both major candidates weighed in on the expanding financial turmoil today. Republican John McCain spoke to voters this afternoon in Orlando, Florida.
First thing I think that we should note is that the action taken on Lehman was not backed by taxpayers' dollars. The taxpayers are not involved, and I think that was a very important step forward because if we had had the taxpayers back Lehman Brothers, then it would have just been a slippery slope. And so unlike Bear Stearns, that first one, there is no taxpayers' money at risk. I just an hour or so ago talked to Secretary Paulson about this. As I mentioned earlier in my remarks, the regulatory system is broken. It was designed for the days in the stock market when they used to hold up cards and they would yell back and forth at each other. Now the global economy is instantaneous. Around the world, this trading goes on. So we've got to catch up the regulatory bodies to make sure that there is the proper oversight and regulation and transparency.
Barack Obama campaigned in Grand Junction, Colorado.
Too many folks in Washington and on Wall Street weren't minding the store. You know, for 8 years, we've had policies that have shredded consumer protections, that have loosened oversight and regulation, and encouraged outsized bonuses to CEOs while ignoring middle-class Americans. The result is the most serious financial crisis since the Great Depression.
Treasury Secretary Paulson said investors and taxpayers should separate rhetoric from reality as they begin to assess the fallout from today's bad news.
We're not going to move through this in a straight line. There are going to be some real rough spots along the road, but I believe we're making progress. And when I look at the way the markets are performing today, I think it's a testament to the way the financial industry has come together, because they're dealing with an extraordinary set of circumstances, and they're dealing in a way we should all be proud of.
Jeffrey Brown has a closer look at the dramatic turn of events in New York.
And for that look behind the scenes, I'm joined by Jenny Anderson, business reporter for the New York Times, and David Wessel, economics editor for the Wall Street Journal. Well, David, Lehman Brothers had been in trouble for a while. Was there any one thing that finally brought it to the brink this weekend?
It doesn't seem like there was a straw that broke the camel's back. They had basically engaged in some wishful thinking that some deal was going to come through. Their luck ran out. They hoped over the weekend, as you know, to find a buyer so they wouldn't have to go bankrupt. In the end, neither of the potential buyers, Barclays, the British bank, or Bank of America, was willing to do a deal without substantial help from the Fed and the taxpayers. The Fed and the Treasury said no, so the last resort was to file for bankruptcy, which is what they did.
Jenny Anderson, as we heard, the federal government, federal officials were pretty clear from the start that they were not going to step in this time, but they had to convince Wall Street of that, right? So it sounds as though there were some very dramatic meetings over the weekend. Tell us what was going on.
I think there was a little bit of horse trading going on. I think the government was very adamant that they didn't want to do a direct bailout program for Lehman Brothers, and they didn't do that. They stuck to their guns on that. But in the end, there was a little bit of give and take. The Fed actually agreed to expand a lending facility that they had already put in place that was already an expanded facility. So they've made it a little bit easier for Wall Street firms in the wake of the collapse of Lehman Brothers to borrow a little bit more money. So that is, that is a taxpayer issue. But at the end of the day, they didn't actually go forward with a full-blown bailout. I think the government really tried to stick to that. And in the end, Wall Street actually also stepped forward and put $77 billion up and said, we're going to create another facility behind the Fed facility in case that's not enough. So they're trying to just throw capital at the problem and say, we can deal with this. There's going to be enough money. I don't know that the markets actually bought that today, but that was the message.
And all this was hashed out in some very high-powered meetings, it sounds like.
These were around-the-clock meetings all weekend long. Started on a rainy evening on Friday night with these guys shuffling in, and it lasted all weekend long. There were people there at wee hours of the morning on Sunday morning, and there were a lot of dramatic turns. I mean, at one point it looked as if there was going to be a rescue of Lehman Brothers, and it looked as if Barclays was going to step up, and then Barclays walked away, and suddenly it looked like Wall Street had to come up with its own solution, and then the government stepped up, and I mean, there was a lot of give and take. It was a fascinating weekend.
David, what does your reporting tell you about why the government decided not to step in this case, given what they did with Bear Stearns, given what we saw real recently with Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac? What happened this time?
Well, I think there were a number of differences. One is, I think both Secretary Paulson and Fed Chairman Ben Bernanke and his New York Fed President Tim Geithner really wanted a place where they could draw a line in the sand for the reasons that Mr. Paulson said. At some point, if you keep bailing out these banks, if you keep doing these assisted transitions, it looks like you can't say no to anybody. But secondly, my sense is that they didn't really think that Barclays or Bank of America were serious bidders for Lehman Brothers. It was only with a huge amount of money, basically a bargain basement price, would they have come forward. So I think there was both the specifics and the general attempt to set a rule, to draw a line in the sand and say, basta, enough.
Now, David, let me stay with you. Well, let's turn to Merrill Lynch, because again, we knew that it was in some trouble, but why the very sudden move to sell itself to Bank of America?
Well, I think that they saw what happened to Lehman Brothers when they waited too long. If you wait too long and your market value goes down, you're less and less of an attractive target, apparently. So I think that they had a CEO who was not, who was a newcomer, who was the CEO at Lehman had been there for a long time, very emotionally involved in the firm. John Thain at Merrill Lynch, he clearly thought it was in his interest to sell and sell now before things got worse. Everybody knows that when Lehman went down, the other sequoias on Wall Street, Merrill Lynch and AIG, the insurance company, would be shaking, and Mr. Thain made a move to get the deal done before that could happen to him.
Jenny Anderson, you have anything to add on what you saw happen with Merrill Lynch?
Well, I think David makes a very good point. I think Dick Fuld, the CEO of Lehman Brothers, he held out to the bitter end. I mean, late on Sunday night, he didn't want to file for bankruptcy. He was not ready for this move, and this is an extension of what's been going on for a long time. These assets have been deteriorating in value. Their stock price has gotten hammered. They've needed more and more capital, and it seems like there's just been a denial at work. And I think John Thain saw the writing on the wall. He said, "I don't want to be Dick Fuld. I don't want to be in the same situation. This is I'm not going to put the firm at risk. I'm going to do a deal." I mean, what's interesting is Bank of America had approached Merrill Lynch before, and John Thain had said no. But let's look at Merrill Lynch. A year ago, it was a $100 billion company. It's a $50 billion company today. He didn't want to see it go to 25 on Monday morning when Lehman Brothers announced its liquidation, so he moved fast.
All right, Jenny, then to add on to all of that, we start hearing about AIG. Now, this is an insurance company, a very big one. How did it get into trouble, and what's the situation there now?
Well, the situation, I think, is very dire. I mean, I think they need to raise a lot of capital. They weren't able to come up with the money today in a timely fashion. I think there were, too many crises for one weekend. I mean, it was sort of one thing after another. It was Lehman, and then it was Merrill, and then it got to AIG, and time ran out, and they just couldn't get the financing lined up, and now they're having to cast a wider net for that financing. They got into trouble on a lot of the same issues that Lehman and Merrill did, which is toxic real estate securities packaged into very complex securities that it appears a lot of the CEOs didn't really understand how they worked and how they would fall apart, more importantly. A lot of these firms were very levered. They'd borrowed a lot of money, and as these things started to fall apart, it's created huge problems for the companies and a need for capital that they just can't find now. The capital is running out.
So, David, it added up today to a more than 500-point drop. So from people you're talking to, what's the mood? Is there any sense of that this is a bottom, or do we expect more?
Well, I think it was pretty much of a disappointment that the market turned so sour at the end of the day. Early in the day, people were kind of relieved that the stock market was performing better, down only 300 points, which seemed modest compared to the size of the headlines in our papers. I think there are two views on this. One view is that this is just going to get worse and worse as more and more banks and financial firms hunker down, unable to raise enough capital to expand lending. They contract their lending and choke off growth. That's the pessimistic scenario. The optimistic scenario is that maybe the last couple of days have been the cathartic event where everybody faces reality, takes their losses, puts this behind them. We now know what the rules are. The government isn't going to bail anybody else out unless they have a dire emergency that shakes the system. And maybe this can be seen as the darkest day and things get better. I honestly don't know which it is. I know what we all hope it is.
Jenny Anderson, in the short term, what happens to Lehman's employees, investors, and the same thing for Merrill? What happens to the investors there?
Well, I think Lehman shareholders have effectively been wiped out. Their employees are having a terrible day. I mean, it's a real tragedy. This is a very storied firm, and there are some incredibly distraught people today. It's not a great job market on Wall Street already. Everyone else is laying people off to sort of flood the market with another 25,000 people is pretty severe. They are looking to sell their asset management business, Neuberger Berman, which they will probably be able to do. This is a valuable business. They will attempt to sell the broker-dealer business, so they put sort of the holding company into bankruptcy, but there are some assets that they will try to sell, but I think shareholders are pretty much done in. As for Merrill Lynch, it's unclear how severe the layoffs will be in a Bank of America Merrill Lynch combination. Interesting that Ken Lewis not very long ago commented that he was done with investment banking. Investment bankers can be very expensive to hold on to, and he had experimented with that and it was very expensive, and now he is back in the game with a whole investment bank from Merrill Lynch, and he'll have to see what to do with those bankers in a market where there is not a lot of activity. But what he did get is he got the 16,000 thundering herd brokers, and that's what he wanted.
All right, Jenny Anderson of the New York Times, David Wessel at the Wall Street Journal. Thanks both very much.
Thanks for having us.
More now about the root causes and potential implications of the day's events, and to Margaret Warner.
And to help us understand that, I'm joined by Diane Swank, chief economist at Mesirow Financial, a Chicago-based financial services firm, Nouriel Roubini, chairman of the consulting firm RGE Monitor. He's also a professor of economics at New York University's Stern School of Business. And Kenneth Rogoff, professor of economics at Harvard University. He was chief economist at the International Monetary Fund from 2001 until 2003. Welcome to all of you. Diane Swank, let me begin with you. Did the federal government, did the Treasury do the right thing this weekend, make the right decision not to prop up Lehman Brothers?
I think that was the right decision, but I think there's a 1-2 punch here. I mean, they did expand collateral. The Fed expanded the collateral they'll accept. That is putting their actual balance sheet at risk. Now that they've done that, if they really want that capital to be used to utilize those funds on Wall Street, they're going to need to lower the Fed funds rate tomorrow and lower the discount rate tomorrow. And I'm not positive they're going to do that. I am hopeful that we do see a 50 basis point cut in the Fed funds rate tomorrow that will not only help to bring down the base level of interest rates for consumers, because those spreads are very high on mortgages out there now, but will more directly help to provide capital and make it very cheap for the existing financial firms on Wall Street.
All right, Professor Rogoff, what's your view about the wisdom of the decision Hank Paulson made?
Well, I absolutely agree with Diane. They did the right thing. We already spent $29 billion on the Bear Stearns bailout. The government had taken on trillions of dollars of debt with Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. And it's, as John McCain said, it's a slippery slope if they did something here. On the other hand, I don't know how long they're going to hang tough. I don't think it's over. I think this is going to continue into other credit markets. And I suspect at some point you'll see the federal government back. But it was good to set a baseline to say, you know, we're just not going to bail out everyone in America.
Nouriel Roubini, do you share your colleagues' view that this was a good decision? And do you read Paulson's comments today about AIG as signaling essentially the same thing as far as AIG is concerned, that the federal government's not going to step in to save it?
I do agree that this was the right decision, because until now we've been in a process where profits are privatized and losses are socialized. So this was the right thing to do. Unfortunately, this is the worst financial crisis we've experienced in the United States since the Great Depression. Even Alan Greenspan says this is once-in-a-century phenomenon. So things are getting worse. They'll have hundreds of banks going belly up. Most of the growth leaders are going to disappear. Insurance companies are in trouble. There is no light at the end of the tunnel, and now there is a vicious circle with the real economy contracting and the financial sector contracting, and everything is feeding on each other. So this is a very severe financial and economic crisis, and we're in the middle of a recession.
And Diane Swank, do you share that view that we're not at the end of this? This is not bottom, and if so, where do you think we are in the meltdown?
We're not at bottom. I do share that view. I think the economy is going to get worse before it gets better. In fact, the only way, by our analysis, you could even flatline on consumer spending and not contract is if oil fell to $75 per barrel by the end of September and stayed there through the end of the year. So we're going into a very hard holiday season. Consumers have a lot of weight on their shoulder, and they don't have a lot of access to credit. That's why I really think it's critical that the Fed steps in here. I also think, though, that there might be a bit of a light at the end of the tunnel as foreign economies are weakening as well. We're finally seeing a sort of 180 reversal by foreign central banks. I think we are going to see the European Central Bank lower rates before the end of the year as well, which is going to start to help heal the system. It's not going to erase problems through 2009. I think we're talking about a 2010 before we feel like we've got any kind of real grounding, even though the economy may be technically expanding before then.
Professor Rogoff, do you think it'll be until 2010? Alan Greenspan said yesterday he thought he hoped the housing market would stabilize sometime in 2009, and that's what Paulson said today, too.
Well, I'd put a little bit of optimism after today in that they're at least admitting there's a problem. Until now, the government policy has been to lower interest rates, try to bail out a firm here and there and think that somehow this is going to go away. But the problem is our financial sector is bloated. There have been years of epic profits. They've become too big. They need to shrink. And the government can't support them all. And by finally really acknowledging that this weekend, I mean, I think it's looking towards some healing. And I think we're certainly going to have a deeper recession as a result of this, but maybe we might come out a little faster. On the other hand, I certainly don't think we'll be in good shape still by the middle of next year.
And underscoring that, I just wanted to add, Japan never acknowledged its problems, and that's why they had over a decade, almost 15 years of problems. This is somewhat, as hard as it is, at least realizing your problems is one step to solving them.
Absolutely.
And Mr. Rubini, why don't you weigh in here? I mean, you've had a very bleak view for quite some time now. Are you willing to wager a prognosis here about when it will turn around?
Unfortunately, I think we're going to have a very severe recession. It's going to last at least 18 months through the middle of next year. And this financial crisis is not going to be over anytime soon. And the problems are not just problems of housing. Housing has not yet bottomed out. Home prices are going to fall for another 15%, for a cumulative fall of 40%. The problem was not just subprime mortgages. It was subprime mortgages, near-prime mortgages, prime mortgages, credit cards, auto loans, student loans, commercial real estate, Muni bonds, leverage loans that finance LBOs that should have never occurred, and even a fat tail of the corporate system has a huge amount of junk bond debt, is borderline unprofitable, and is going to get in trouble. We had the biggest housing and asset bubble and credit bubble in U.S. history. Now it's going bust, and many institutions, households, home builders, financial institutions, corporations are going to go bust. So it's not just about housing. This is a severe economic and financial crisis, and the only light at the end of the tunnel so far is the one of the incoming train wreck, unfortunately.
Professor Rogoff, how do you see it? Do you have such a bleak view of the fact that the root cause of this is a lot bigger than the housing and credit crunch?
Well, I'm not sure I can quite get to where Nouriel is on being that bleak. I mean, I think that's definitely a risk here. The way I see things going is that the taxpayer is going to end up bailing out the system, and that's going to be what's going to put an end to it at some point after they've sort of seen enough carnage. We've had the sacrificial lamb of Lehman Brothers. We're going to end up having a huge cost to this. It's just staggering. It's unfair to have the taxpayers bail out these rich bankers, but I do think that's going to be the end game, and I think it won't be quite like the Great Depression here, but this is certainly just an extraordinary event that we're witnessing. Lehman Brothers going under, Merrill Lynch disappearing, only 2 investment banks left. It's just incredible.
What does this mean, Diane Swank? What is the impact on the nation's financial system when you have really in New York now down to just 2 of the 5 major investment banking houses?
Well, you know, it's interesting because we forget that we're in a global economy. If this had happened 15 or 20 years ago, I think the repercussions would have been closer to the complete and utter meltdown scenarios that Nouriel gets to. So I don't quite get as far as Nouriel does either, because we're in a global economy with global investment banks, and there's a lot of niche players, I have to admit. I happen to work for a company that's on the other side of this game. We've picked up an enormous amount of talent from Bear Stearns and hope to get even more talent hiring workers today that might not have looked at us as a regional player or as a national player that's a privately held financial services firm. We do investment banking. We do a lot of the same kind of financial services. So it's really been an opportunity for us. So I think those offsets are often underestimated in terms of the reaction function for the overall financial services system.
And what do you, Nouriel Roubini, what do you think is the likely impact on Wall Street and really the implications for Wall Street of what happened today in terms of the way it operates, the way it does business? I mean, is Diane Swank right that there's enough diversification out there globally and also regionally to just fill in?
First of all, globally, at this point, it's not just the U.S. recession. The latest data from Japan, from Canada, from Europe, from the UK are suggesting the world economy, the advanced economies are contracting. 50% of global GDP now is in recession territory, and soon enough, going to have a significant slowdown of growth also in emerging markets. So there is a risk of a global recession. And it's true that Wall Street is going to change radically. 3 out of the 5 investment banks are gone. And in my view, Goldman Sachs and Morgan Stanley should find another partner and do what Merrill has done, because they may not be able to survive. They borrow short term, they're highly leveraged, they lend long, and therefore they're subject to the same risk of a bank run like any bank, but they don't have access to deposit insurance and have only limited access to the lend of last resort support of the Fed. So Wall Street is going to change. Hundreds of smaller banks and medium size are going to go bankrupt. It's going to be a completely different financial system. But in the meanwhile, the collateral damage from Wall Street to Main Street is going to be severe. That's the risk right now, that the collateral damage is going to imply a more severe recession where the credit contraction, the financial losses are going to hurt jobs, incomes, and the overall economy.
Diane Swank, do you agree that it will be harder now for businesses to raise capital, to expand, to hire?
Well, that's why I think the Fed needs to actually lower interest rates. Yes, we are seeing credit crunch worsen, and that's why all of us are very pessimistic in the near term that the U.S. economy will get worse before it gets better, and I think that's very important. With that said, you know, I just see the diversification. I was in banking for 19 years, and I'll tell you, if this had happened in 1990 to this degree, and we had a crisis in the early 1990s that was fairly substantial, the consequences would have been even greater. I think our system is fundamentally stronger today, and I'm seeing the shock absorbers not on Wall Street. My world isn't Wall Street centric, it's more Main Street centric. I'm seeing companies that have incredible amount of cash on their balance sheets, and we actually own part of a bank that is the fastest growing bank in the country right now. It's part of the old LaSalle Bank that Bank of America bought. We took all their senior managers, and guess what? We're gaining market share.
Professor Rogoff, there's a lot of talk today about new regulation or needing a different regulatory structure. And I know that's down the road some because Congress has to deal with that. But if you look at what happened today, are there some clear regulatory changes that, had they been instituted, would have prevented this or cushioned it?
Well, I think there are a couple simple changes that would have been helpful. We could require banks and financial institutions to have more of their own cash supporting their investments. Higher capital ratios is the jargon. We also would like their investments to be more transparent. They were making these trades from one investment bank to another that only rocket scientists could understand, and when it went south, it didn't work out very well. But that said, I think a great thing about the fact that the Treasury and the Federal Reserve walked away from Lehman is they're putting some discipline in the market. Stockholders, bondholders, they know they've got to look at these firms. The federal government's not going to always bail them out. So even if, as I think, the federal government is going to come in big later on, they at least have some discipline and maybe not quite so much need for regulation, which could end up throwing out the baby with the bathwater.
And Nouriel Roubini, brief final word from you about the need for more regulation. Where do you come down on that?
Well, in the last few years, the approach has been the one of laissez-faire, and financial markets without appropriate rules and regulations are like the law of the jungle. It gets crazy, mania, panics, asset bubbles, credit bubbles. So self-regulation means no regulation. Market discipline does not work. So I think the pendulum swung too much in the direction of self-regulation and was nowhere there. Now we have to move towards appropriate rules, not excessive rules, but stronger regulation, supervision of financial system. That's what's necessary.
Diane Swank, very brief final word from you on need for more regulation.
You know, it really is underscoring the same thing, the need for more regulation and transparency, but not throwing the baby out with the bathwater. We really already made this mistake once in the wake of Enron. We don't need to, we're always regulating yesterday's problems, and that just opens the door to new problems down the road.
All right, Diane Swank, Nouriel Roubini, and Professor Rogoff, thank you, all three.
Thank you.
You can learn more and ask questions about how today's economic upheaval affects you in our online insider forum. Visit us at pbs.org. Just scroll down to NewsHour Reports. Now, where things stand in the presidential campaign, and to Judy Woodruff.
For an update on the latest developments, we turn to Amy Walter, editor-in-chief of The Hotline, National Journal's Political Daily. And Susan Page, the Washington bureau chief for USA Today. Good to see both of you. Susan, first of all, how are the two campaigns, presidential campaigns, handling all this bad news from Wall Street?
Well, they're both focusing on it. I got the first email from Barack Obama's campaign at about 6, and one from John McCain's AM, and one from John McCain's campaign about an hour later expressing concern, saying they empathize with the problems Americans were having, but with rather different approaches to addressing these. Much more attitude of government role from Barack Obama and what he said today. John McCain in his initial statement said he was glad there had been no federal bailout for Lehman Brothers, said that was the right thing to do. And while John McCain is stepping up his attention to this issue, he's not going as far as Barack Obama is going and talking about what the government would do to help solve it.
So you really see a difference here in approach, Amy?
Well, and I think it's a difference in approach we've been talking about for a while in terms of the kinds of ways in which these two candidates are trying to talk about the idea of changing the bad economic news, right? Both of them are saying clearly, this is not good. What is my administration going to do about this? The McCain campaign actually launched an ad. That was one of the first things that came into my email box that piqued my interest, was an ad that went out almost immediately after the news of this came out, saying, you know, this is why you need mavericks like John McCain and Sarah Palin in Washington, because they're going to be able to reform a system. You need reformers to reform. Now, what that means specifically, we don't know yet. And same with Barack Obama, who's coming out and certainly trying to make the case that John McCain, because he has subscribed to the same policies as George Bush, isn't going to be able to take us out of this yet. What it means for average people, I don't think they've actually enunciated that yet.
Susan, can John McCain argue that what's needed is reform when he's been in Washington for 26 years?
I think he's got a very hard road to hoe on this one. For one thing, he's got to distance himself from President Bush, and you saw both John McCain and Sarah Palin today basically blaming the Bush administration for a failure of oversight that contributed to the problems we saw. That's the first thing he has to do. And then he's got to talk about approaching the economy when that's never been his strong issue. You know, John McCain would much prefer to be talking about national security issues or energy than talking about regulation of the financial markets. I think this is an issue that really rebounds to Barack Obama's advantage. For one thing, it gets us talking focused squarely on the economy, as opposed to, for instance, lipstick on pigs.
So naturally a benefit for Obama?
I mean, any day that, well, that's a good question. I mean, certainly,
as long as we're not talking about lipstick on a pig.
As long as we're not talking about lipstick, which I'm glad that we're not. But we're also talking about George Bush, which is, anytime you're talking about George Bush is a good day for Barack Obama and a bad day for John McCain. Now, who this is going to help, again, I think it comes down to this, which is who voters see as actually giving them something to make them feel as if they feel confident that one of these people is going to take them in a different direction. Now, McCain, I don't think, helped himself very much today when he, in his statement, where I agree with Susan, he looked somewhat uncomfortable talking about the economy, where he said, you know, the fundamentals are strong. And that is Obama jumped right on that statement, saying, all right, this is the same guy. He believes the fundamentals are strong. Really? I don't know anybody else who believes that the economy is doing particularly well.
Have these candidates been talking enough about the economy? Is it they have been talking about it and we haven't been listening? What's been going on?
Well, I think that the Obama campaign in particular has tried to turn the focus back to the economy, but they've been distracted by 7 other things. They have not controlled the issues agenda since the Democratic convention ended. I think they've had a couple weeks where Republicans have driven what we've talked about on cable newscasts and written about in newspapers, and that has not been particularly economic issues. The fact is, Barack Obama has been talking about economic issues, and in fact, in March, he gave a rather extensive speech that talked about regulation of financial markets in the 21st century, which got, I think, very little attention until this morning when his campaign emailed it out so we could all take another look at it.
Right. And speaking of other things, Amy, how is the Obama campaign now handling the Governor Palin choice?
By trying not to talk about the Governor Palin choice and letting other people do that. Even Joe Biden today. This was the new Joe Biden that we're apparently going to see on the trail that the Obama campaign introduced us to last week, saying, you know, he's going to go out there and define this race, define John McCain. And he did come out and make some of those statements, like we were saying earlier about McCain not getting the economics, being part of the Bush economic, you know, following the Bush economic policies. And so I think, you know, for Biden, it's fascinating what I'm seeing right now, which is, remember, he was introduced first as the guy who was yes, part of Washington could give Barack Obama the heft on foreign policy issues. Then during the convention, we were introduced to him as the local boy from Scranton who's going to go out and get those blue-collar voters. Now he's the insider again, and he's the insider saying, look, I've been to Washington long enough to know this guy's no maverick. So he's taking on whatever, he's like a shapeshifter. He's taking on any role that the campaign wants him to play, which is quite frankly what your vice presidential candidate should be doing for you.
Is that what we should look for from him?
I think we're going to see him take a much more aggressive stance. The Obama campaign the last few days have decided they have to go more fiercely on the attack. They don't want Barack Obama to do that. He's the reformer who's been above politics. That means they'll do it in two ways. They'll do it with Joe Biden, and they'll do it with their ads, which already are much tougher in the last few days than they've been in the previous couple weeks.
But they still do have this, if you will, phenomenon of Governor Sarah Palin out there who is getting more.
I think their approach now is who?
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Who is still getting a lot of attention and who is limiting her exposure to the news media. Done one interview in the 2.5 weeks since she was introduced.
But we've been talking about this before, that at some point we knew that the bounce was going to come down. And part of the good and the bad, if you're Sarah Palin, about not granting interviews, is that the press then becomes less interested in you. And she goes on the trail, but very scripted. She gave a 15-minute presentation in Nevada, worked the rope line for a little bit, got back on the plane. So if she's not giving reporters any news, they're not going to spend a whole lot of time paying attention to her.
I think she's going to be forced to do more interviews. And frankly, she did well on the first interview she did. So why not do more interviews? And especially since she can make a case. Clearly, the Obama people have had trouble kind of dealing with her, responding to her. So it makes all the sense in the world that she should do more interviews. I think especially with USA Today would be a good place for her.
Or the NewsHour or Hotline.
Absolutely.
What about money? I mean, Barack Obama broke all records last month. $66 million, Susan.
Incredible.
How much difference is this going to make?
You know, it's an incredible sum of money to think a candidate could raise that kind of money in a month. I think it does not make very much difference. This is a presidential race that's attracted enormous interest. Both candidates are going to have enough money to make their case. This election will turn not on money, but it'll turn on how they do in the debates and what happens in the real world, in the economy, in the war in Iraq, in the situation with national security.
I think the one place where it could help Obama, and he's already been doing this anyway, which is on the ground. Now, you know, we hear report after report from these states that Barack Obama has the staff and the infrastructure in some of these places. And if we're looking at the polls a month from now, like they look today, where Ohio, Pennsylvania, Michigan, 2 or 3 points difference, that's where your on-the-ground operation can make a big difference. Now, I agree, there's a law of diminishing returns when it comes to television advertising and some of those other things. But when it comes to on-the-ground, having the people in place right now doing the early absentee vote programs, getting those votes counted, making sure they have the systems in place, money is very important.
It's a lot of money. Not a bad thing. We'll see how much difference it makes. Amy Walter, Susan Page, thank you both.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Now, Hurricane Ike's impact in Texas. NewsHour correspondent Tom Bearden is there, and he has our report.
Aerial photography today showed the enormous havoc Hurricane Ike wreaked on the Texas coast. Thousands of homes were wiped away. What's left? Just the outlines of towns and lives. Texas officials spent much of today assessing the damage, 2 days after a 13-foot storm surge hit. Ike was a Category 2 storm. Survivors recalled the frightening night.
To realize after the fact, you feel like you are just at the ends of the earth. There's no way out, and you're going to die. The building shook. Fortunately, there was no windows blown out, except in the vehicles on the first level. But we just hunkered down.
There's houses without roofs, trees inside houses. I mean, there's boats. We've got boats in our lawn that's not ours.
What followed was the largest search and rescue operation in Texas history. 2,000 people were plucked from flooded areas by helicopter and by boat. Many residents became rescuers themselves, helping friends and neighbors to safety.
People were sleeping in their attics. They had, you could see where they had cut holes in the top of their attics to get out, you know, to get to be safer ground.
As many as 140,000 people throughout the region ignored evacuation orders. Since the storm passed, hundreds have lined up to board buses out of Galveston in search of shelter.
We were kind of huddled all in the room together with candles and, you know,
whatever little food we had and water. It was horrible.
What have you home now?
We have some water damage and stuff, so that's why we're getting out. We don't have enough supplies to last. They're saying it's going to be like a month before the water and everything is back on. We don't have enough supplies to last.
FEMA Director Paulson in Washington today tried to encourage the victims.
I know it's going to be tough for people in Louisiana and people in Texas over the next several weeks. Again, some people will be out of their home for not only weeks but months, and our hearts go out to them. We know how tough that is, and we're going to do everything possible to make things as smooth as possible and put them in some very safe places and hopefully help them get back onto normal life.
About 400 people chose to ride out the storm in Orange, where 6 feet of water flooded about a third of the town. Some of them emerged today seeking medical attention, food, and water. The Salvation Army said it was stepping up operations.
Today we have additional feeding units coming into Galveston as well as other affected areas around the Houston, Beaumont, Orange, Texas City, the region that's been hit the worst. And we have 5 units that will be on Galveston Island. We'll be centrally locating 3 of those in neighborhoods so that folks can come out and get meals today, hot meals that'll be brought in today, and then we'll have 2 that'll be roaming throughout for those who may not get the word.
Not all relief efforts have gone smoothly. Among the frustrations, lack of fuel. In Houston, there were long lines to get groceries and supplies.
It's chaos. I live on Fuqua and Beamer, and we are totally damaged over there. Totally.
The cleanup is already well underway. Here in downtown Houston, they're hauling away truckloads of shattered glass from broken high-rise windows. And there isn't very much traffic around the city either, and that's probably a good thing because many of the traffic signals have either been destroyed or don't have power.
I'll keep the 2.1 and we'll let them fly this afternoon, see what happens.
The Emergency Operations Center in Houston is the heart of the recovery and relief efforts. Judge Ed Emmett is the Harris County Administrator. The county includes much of the area hurt by the storm. Today, he said Houston residents heeded warnings and took appropriate measures.
We started this term hunker down, and we told everybody else just hunker down, ride out the storm, and they did. One of the lessons learned from Rita was people evacuated who shouldn't have. They were not in danger of losing their life. And frankly, you're better off, even if your house is going to be damaged from wind, you're better off staying, seeing what the damage is, assessing your options, taking care of it, and then leaving. And that's what people have done. Thanks again.
The judge said Houstonians who did leave.
USA organizes events to provide local foster kids with warm clothes, everyday necessities, and a little fun. But they can't do it without you. To learn how you can help, click on the Foster Kids link at sleepcountry.com. Sleep Country knows not everyone can be a foster parent, but anyone can help a foster child.
Jeff Merkley? When it comes to world affairs, he's bitten off a little more than he can chew.
The country of Georgia. Yeah, the country of Georgia.
But when it comes to feeding his own self-interest, Jeff Merkley is an expert. Jeff Merkley voted to give $150,000 in taxpayer money to the World Affairs Council, the group's paid executive director. Jeff Merkley. Jeff Merkley in the U.S. Senate? Now that's a little tough to swallow. The National Republican Senatorial Committee is responsible for the content of this advertising.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, security at the Rose Garden today, where they were singing the national anthem, were given this sign. It says, "Be aware of a singing Steve Dunn." Now here he is with tonight's Circular File.
Without the singing.
Without the singing. At least they spelled my name right.
Yeah.
Let's go to New York City for tonight's Circular File. That's where we find Manhattan restaurateur Nello Balan. That means he owns a restaurant.
I gotcha.
Yeah. He went to court suing for $1 million. He was claiming emotional distress over a damaged umbrella. Wow. He claims he lent his limited edition designer umbrella to a supermodel who then ruined it. Well, guess what? The judge threw out the lawsuit, and the judge fined Balan's attorney for filing a frivolous lawsuit. So on that note, we can say when it rains, it pours.
And what did you learn? Don't lend your umbrella to a supermodel. Or hold it for her,
if
right?
I knew one. Thanks for watching, folks.
Fisher Communications.
Your Northwest Pontiac dealer celebrates GM's 100th anniversary by extending employee pricing. You pay what we pay, plus get cash back. The all-new 095 32 Highway. With employee discount plus cashback, catch a vibe for under $15,300. Pontiac G6 with employee discount plus cashback, $16,720. Get into your Northwest Buick Pontiac GMC dealer by September 30th.
Emert International, raising, leveling, and moving the world one house at a time. Emert International has been recycling site-built homes for over 40 years by moving them from one location to another. Right now, we have a wide variety of affordable houses and duplexes that are ready for relocation to your property. This can be a truly amazing value. Whether you want to achieve the dream of owning your own home or you are looking for an investment opportunity, call Emert International today.
It's never a good deal if it's a product nobody wants. So Sleep Country put its most popular items on sale during the bestseller sale on now. Save on Sleep Country's best-selling Simmons Beauty Rest, the most popular Sealy Posturepedic, and top-selling Sleep Number bed. Not off-brands, not overstock items, just the best deals on the best-selling models, but only for a limited time. Guaranteed comfort, best selection, lowest price.
Millions of Americans used to think they couldn't afford their prescriptions month in and month out, that they'd have to cut back or go without their medications altogether. Then they asked us for a second opinion. The Walmart prescription drug program has saved Americans $1 billion in just over a year. It's another way we're working to make quality health care affordable and accessible for everyone. Save money, live better, Walmart.
A veterinarian deals with all kinds of situations. It has to get through when someone won't listen to reason. Up, Oliver. Well, sounds like perfect practice for Congress. I'm Kurt Schrader, and I approve this message because instead of playing partisan games, I'll work for real solutions. Fiscal responsibility, bring our troops and money home from Iraq, improve our education system, and invest in renewable energy and a better economy right here in Oregon. Certainly communicating with these guys is good training for Congress.
I'm Gordon Smith, and I approve this ad.
Richard Gilmore, serial rapist of young girls, convicted for only one because the statute of limitations had expired. Now he may go free, back into society. Jeff Merkley opposed extending the statute of limitations for prosecuting rape of minors. Merkley opposes mandatory life sentences for serial rapists like Richard Gilmore. Jeff Merkley, failing to protect our most vulnerable.
Tonight's K2 program brought to you by Car Toys.